Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second to last night of the 45th Mill Valley Film Festival. We're so excited to have you here for Nanny. This is, please. Nanny is directed by Nikayatu Jusu, and it is literally the first film in my role also as a programmer that I booked for this festival, and the first film that we chose to honor. It's an extraordinary film with an extraordinary cast and something we are very excited to present to you. As I mentioned earlier in the week, there are some films here, and I joked that I don't know what these filmmakers are eating and drinking over the pandemic, but clearly it was something that took them all to another level. And what's particularly wonderful about this, that this is a first feature, and it won the Dramatic Prize, the highest prize at the Sundance Film Festival, the second black woman to ever receive it, and the first one in the horror or psychological thriller genre, which is an extraordinary take for this film. And while we're waiting for her to come here, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our sponsor, Carrie Harris. Carrie has been a long-time supporter of the festival, and we appreciate her particularly supporting this particular film. I'd like to introduce one of my fellow staff members, Osinachi Ibe. Please welcome her to the stage. Are you out of breath where you've been running?
Yeah, I ran across the street. Hi, everybody, and welcome to day 10 of the festival. My name is Osinachi Ibe, and I am the Mind the Gap production manager. Mind the Gap is Mill Valley Film Festival's equity and inclusion initiative, and it champions the filmmaking of women and non-binary people and other marginalized groups. And I am proud to announce that in this year's festival, 53% of the films were directed by women. So tonight you will be watching the film Nanny, written and directed by Nikayatu Jusu. And the film follows Aisha, a Senegalese American immigrant who works for a wealthy New York couple as the nanny of their young child, while she has plans to bring her own young son to the United States. And as she navigates her increasingly strenuous work environment, the West African water deity Mami, Wata, and Anansi the spider begin to haunt her. So when I first saw this film, I was really moved by the intimate exploration of the immigrant experience. And I also really loved how West African spirituality and femininity was incorporated into the horror genre. I thought it was refreshing and very thoughtful, and I'm very excited for all of you guys to see it. So here tonight,
Are you going to introduce our surprise guest?
yes, we have a couple of people that I'll be talking to in a Q&A after the screening, which is the director, Nikayatu Jusu.
And please stay for that.
Yes, as well as the lead actress, Anna Diop. So in addition to the wonderful screening of this film, Nikayatu is receiving the 2022 MVFF award for her debut feature, because this is her debut feature. And here to present the award to her is Anna Diop.
Hello. We are really thrilled to be here tonight. I am especially thrilled to be here tonight to honor my incredible director, Nikayatu Jusu, on behalf of her triumphant film, Nanny. Nikayatu first had the idea for the film 8 years ago while she was a student at NYU's Tisch. She observed Black and brown women caring for children from affluent families. The experience of witnessing her own mother work in domestic spaces breathed life into the idea for this film. From my first meeting with Nikayatu, I instantly knew how special this experience would be. She took the time and consideration to talk through the scripts and the characters with myself and my fellow actors, leaving space always for questions and exploration. I've never felt so seen as an artist, as a Black woman on set, which is all due to her fearless direction. This film stands apart as an original genre-bending and beautiful story about love, grief, and identity. I will never take for granted this journey we've been on together. And so with excitement and admiration, I am honored to present Nikayatu Jusu with the Mill Valley Film Festival Award.
Thank you, Anna, my muse, the woman who, not to recycle a phrase, but legitimately breathed life into the words that I put on the page and has catapulted us into this trajectory that we're on now. That is a whirlwind, that is dizzying, that I have yet to process in real time because everything is happening so fast. Thank you to Mill Valley for seeing us. Thank you all for being here. You could be anywhere today at this time, but you're here with us now. There are a few people I want to thank. Amazon, Blumhouse for taking us on. We didn't have a distributor going into Sundance. We were one of the few films that were in competition with no distributor, and they championed us, you know, and so that means it continues to mean a lot because we feel like we have a machine behind us at this stage. Our little big film that we shot at the peak of COVID in New York City, that we shot at a time when my dad was transitioning from cancer. I've had a lot of loss in this process, and I feel him over every facet of this part of our journey. I feel him over seeing us through to the end of our production when there were studio productions with 100 times our budget getting shut down due to COVID. So I feel really privileged to be here on this side. Thank you to Mark Fishkin, Zoe Elton, the California Film Institute, our producing partners, my manager Gabby, who's here. There's a quotation from a novelist, Toni Morrison, who I revere so much, who's one of my North Compasses in creating work. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There's no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, no room for fear. We speak, we write, we do language. This is how civilizations heal. Thank you all.
And as a reminder, they will be back for the Q&A.
Please join me in welcoming the writer-director Nikyatu Jusu and the lead actress Anna Diop.
Thank you.
Okay, so congratulations on this film.
Thank
guys.
you.
So I want to start off by asking where this film came from. This is a really fascinating way to look at the immigrant story. It's something that so many people know so intimately, but I've never seen it explored through this genre. And you're exploring dynamics, like power dynamics with race and class and nationality. So can you talk to me about where this came from and why you decided to explore it through horror?
So there are pieces of my mother's story in this. There are pieces of Anna's mother's story in this. My mother growing up, I'm Sierra Leonean, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. And I watched my mom do some domestic work in between pursuing her own dreams of being a novelist and self-publishing and owning a business. Like, there were other aspirations that she had, but domestic work was one of the more accessible forms of labor for her, and is one of the more accessible forms of labor for a lot of Black and brown women in the world. But it's not the sum of who they are. And so I'm hyper aware of domestic workers. I'm hyper aware of the people who uphold our society and are undervalued in a lot of ways. And so I wanted to center a protagonist through that lens, but I also didn't want to approach it as a straightforward drama or a PSA. I wanted to incorporate folklore that spoke to the ways that people have survived systems that they weren't meant to thrive within.
Thank you. And Anna, can you talk about what drew you to this character and how you prepared to play her?
Well, like Nikayatu said, my mother also worked in the domestic space. She was a nanny for many years. She immigrated from Senegal to Houston and brought me when I was 5 years old for the same reasons that Aisha immigrates to New York, which was to build a better life for her child. And so the story was deeply personal to me. And I love my mother, and she's my hero, and she's the strongest person I know, and I've always longed to be able to honor her through what I do. And this film gave me the opportunity to do that. Nikayatu, creating this world, gave me the opportunity to do that.
So this is a very personal story to both of you guys. And you're both African women, and there's an exploration of African spirituality and femininity in this piece. Can you speak to your decision to explore that, and for you, what it was like navigating that in terms of your character?
Mami Wata and Anansi are two of the more prevalent and visible figures in the African diaspora in terms of folklore. And they're also very American figures in terms of the ways that enslaved people have survived systems like enslavement. And so although they're not featured in the mainstream, I wanted to bring them to the mainstream in a way that really spoke to the true horrors of navigating the American dream. So they're two figures that theoretically and intellectually speak to survival in terms of externalizing Aisha's interior journey, but also I look to filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro for creature creation. And I think that the mermaid and the spider are two figures, whether you know about Anansi and Mami Wata or not, you recognize a mermaid and you recognize a spider. Anansi is a chaos agent who comes in the form of a spider. He's a trickster. He fights oppression with violence. He fights violence with violence. And I'm always interested in figures of survival who don't just lay down and take the oppression in a nonviolent way. I really love rebels and chaos agents. And then Mami Wata is a mermaid who's very cunning and sensual. And so if you'll notice, when these figures start to present themselves in Aisha's trajectory, she's starting to enact their personalities. She becomes more rebellious when Anansi's present. She becomes more aware of her sensuality when Mami Wata is present. So although I don't expect every audience to understand, I trust my audience's intelligence and ability to take initiative to pursue research about what these figures actually mean. But just visually, VFX-wise, logistically, I love creature creation, I love creature features, and so those were the things that I was thinking about.
Okay, thank you. And Anna, do you want to speak to what it was like for your character, just navigating this African spirituality and femininity?
Yeah, like Nikayatu said, once these creatures, for lack of a better term, start to invade Aisha's reality and her mental space, she begins to act in ways that are more rebellious, that are more resistant, that are less apologetic. And it's really interesting hearing you say with Mami Wata exploring femininity and sensuality and her kind of moving through her in that way, because I was like, why does Aisha sleep with this man on the first date? Okay, well, yeah, she's being imbued. She's being imbued with this.
Why would you say this in front of this crowd right now?
I'm sorry. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you know, as an actor, you're asking yourself these questions when you're breaking down scripts and scenes and such. And so, yeah, it was exciting to play with what was already on the page, what was written so beautifully, was that she is being imbued with these forces that are moving her towards a bolder, more powerful, again, less apologetic version of herself.
There's a particular relationship where that's very present, and that's in Aisha's relationship with Amy. And that's a relationship that is very unsettling because it seems as though, I don't know, Amy has some kind of an emotional hunger that she wants Aisha to satiate. Just watching those scenes, like when Amy asks her, like, "Oh, I got a promotion. Are you proud of me?" I was very uncomfortable watching it. I just want you to talk about exactly what you're exploring, like the power dynamics that you're exploring with that.
Why were you uncomfortable?
It's just like you're exploiting this woman, and she's helping raise your child, and you're not paying her on time and things like that. And you're asking so much of her already, so she doesn't, in addition to raising your child and sort of helping keep your house up, she doesn't need to also be this emotional support system for you. Yeah.
But the reality is that a lot of us have maneuvered spaces where we have been treated like emotional support systems, particularly. Somebody said, "Tell that truth." I'm gonna tell it. Particularly Black women, in these spaces. And so, part of my film is holding up a mirror to white feminism. And what I love about casting Michelle Monaghan is that she's so smart and she's so self-aware in playing Amy. I did not want someone who's going to play a caricature. We're all maneuvering a patriarchy, but there are levels to this. And, part of navigating whiteness is that you also have a privilege as a white woman. And I think sometimes white women try to find this level playing ground with the women that they hire, the Black and brown women that they hire, like, we're both women. And it's like, sure, from 9 to 5, we are. But it's a hierarchy, and we're all maneuvering a patriarchy that enslaves all of us. Amy's also a slave to capitalism. She also is the breadwinner. I don't know if you all noticed, but she's the breadwinner. She's doing disproportionate domestic labor. She's having to outsource having a child, that labor, raising this child to another woman who has her own child. It becomes this cycle where no one wins, including those who are perceived as privileged. No one wins in a capitalistic patriarchy. And so those were some of the themes that I was navigating in that.
Yeah, I loved how you were honest in showing Amy's struggles instead of just, sort of painting her with a very broad brush. You showed that, like, she's dealing with things too, but she's also perpetuating certain things.
Right. And there are pieces of me in even in Adam. There,
Do tell.
there are pieces of me in everyone. Like, I wrote this, I've met these people, I know these people, but as a filmmaker, whether filmmakers acknowledge it or not, particularly writer-directors, there are pieces of us in all of our characters. So I try not to judge any of my characters, which is why I was so happy to have such a nuanced cast.
Speaking of other cast members, there's a relationship between Kathleen and Aisha that's really beautiful. And it's not till towards the end of the film that you come to understand that both of them lost their children early in their life. And early in the film, they have this really strong connection to each other. Yeah. Was that intentional in terms of both of them losing their children early in the way that you designed those characters?
Yeah, I mean, with Kathleen, she's a sage. You know, she's a mentor figure. She sees something in Aisha that Aisha has yet to see in herself. And we come from a culture that has a lot of reverence for our elders. You know, they've lived a long life and they have things to teach us, whether we acknowledge them or not. But yeah, I think with the women in this film, all of them, there's a connection. And loss is one of those tethers amongst all of the women in this film.
Yeah. I was always struck by how, even when I first read it and then when we started filming, how much Kathleen felt like home to Aisha, and Aisha's been in New York now for a year. But I felt like that character was the one that she felt the most at home with, just reminded her of something grounded and peaceful. And, you know, Malik provides a lot of joy to her life and safety and all of that. But Kathleen felt like something more, and I really loved how beautifully that was written. And then Leslie Uggams
Is a genius.
Gorgeously
Yeah.
brought that to life.
And Anna, can you talk about what it was like playing, you know, those scenes when Aisha learns that she's lost Lamin? You know, she didn't get any closure. She didn't get to say goodbye to him. And there's just a real emotional intensity to the scenes that you're playing. Can you talk about what your process was in preparing for those scenes?
Those are the scenes I was most nervous about for obvious reasons because of the emotional space that Aisha is then in. But I don't know. I mean, I prepared for them like I do every scene, which is just to stay true and honest to what's in front of me and what's happening to me at that point. Aisha has no idea that this has happened. There's these spirits that are trying to tell her and trying to warn her, and as we often do in life, we ignore those things. And so when it came to those scenes, I guess I just allowed myself to truly believe that everything was okay, despite the gnawing feeling that it really wasn't. And then to just go from there. I was surrounded by a brilliant cast and an incredible director, so there was nothing to do but be present.
And after, so we learn about Lamin's death. That's a sudden bit of information that we get, and then we also quickly learn that she's pregnant, and so there's this like rebirth that happens. And then there's also that last scene where she's at peace in the water finally. Can you talk about that? Was that her pregnancy intended to be a rebirth?
Yeah. No. Sorry. Yeah. No. You know, water is a source of birth, rebirth, renewal, death. It's cyclical. It's powerful. We're navigating climate disaster right now, and water is one of the sources of our earth telling us that havoc has been wreaked upon her. It's just such a powerful source. There's a quote from Toni Morrison that water has perfect memory. There's another quote about, I can't remember the source, but never turn your back on water. So I'm one of those people who just has a lot of reverence for what we're navigating in terms of Earth. You know, there's something bigger than us. There's something, regardless of the systems that we've engineered as human beings, i.e. capitalism, there's something so much bigger than these systems that we're navigating, that's more powerful than us, that can wipe us out in the blink of an eye. And so I have a lot of reverence for water. There's also a deep history for African diasporic people during enslavement, people chose to fling their bodies into the water rather than be enslaved, you know, during the transit from their native land to Europe or to the Americas. Some people were thrown overboard. So there's a really powerful history with bodies of water. And the end is a little ambiguous depending on who you speak to, but as an immigrant forging a new life, you have irrevocably a new future, whether you acknowledge it or not. And so although she had tremendous loss, Aisha also has a new future in this new land, just in the same ways that our mothers carved out new futures, whether they embrace the new future or not, you know, traveling to this new place and having a child potentially in this land or bringing the child with you, this is a new future that you are creating. And a lot of immigrant families create new futures. They're inherently artists. They're creating and imagining new futures by emigrating to different lands. So those were all of the things that I was thinking about, but I also didn't want to assault my Black woman protagonist with a dark, low ending. I wanted her to have a future that was radically optimistic.
Before we open it up to audience questions, I have one more question for you guys. What was your creative process working together to create this character, to create this world?
Well, one of the things I did differently for this role, because I was daunted by the fact that I was in every scene and was very nervous about that. I bought these cork boards and these flashcards, and I bought them in pink and I bought them in blue. And on each of the flashcards, I wrote out the event of each scene. So Aisha visits Saleh at the hair salon. She speaks about Lamine and his father. Aisha steps out of the elevator. She sees something in the mirror and runs into Malik. I wrote out the events of each scene where Aisha is in her sane mind, where everything that's happening around her she's aware of and is normal and is going as it should be, in pink. And then in blue, representing water, I wrote out the events of the scene where she's experiencing what she's thinking is some kind of neurosis or psychosis or madness. Those are, of course, we know the scenes where she's being imbued by these spirits, but she doesn't know that yet. And so that helped me to visually see the ascension of madness that she's going into. And it also helped me, because we're filming out of sequence, know one day if we're filming scene 16 and 9 and 43 and 17, where I am emotionally, mentally at any given point, as to relieve her in the editing process of something that's makes sense and is consistent and is emotionally tracking correctly.
And how did you ground yourself? Because you're shooting out of sequence, and so you're all over emotionally. How did you ground yourself during that time?
Well, that board was very helpful because, again, it helped me know exactly where I am in this ascension into, I guess, into madness. But other than that, how did I ground myself? I tried as best as I could to take care of myself so that I had my full capacities with me, no matter what we were filming. And I also I know Aisha very well. I understand loneliness and rage and depression and grief, and joy, and what it is to fall in love, what it is to be nervous about falling in love. So I know a lot of who she is in my cells, and so I guess I just tapped into that.
And what about your creative process, Nikayatu?
I just try to make it through a COVID production at the peak of COVID in New York City. No, you know what, I think if you choose intelligently, you allow your collaborators to do their job. So all of my first choices chose me back, in front of the camera, behind the camera. My department heads, my cinematographer, Rina Yang, my production designer, Jonathan Guggenheim, my costume designer, Charlize Antoinette. I had an amazing team around me whom I trusted. And I think that's the key as a filmmaker, is to understand especially when you write the script, that the script is a springboard, not a Bible. And so I chose people who had a vision, who were not going to be robots executing my vision, who brought new things to my vision. And so once you choose intelligently, you have the opportunity to allow people to run. And that's what my cast did. Like, the dialogue was a springboard. People made the words their own in their mouths. My team, my department heads met with each other. We fought for time to meet, and so no one was an island. This was truly a village. Like, color palette, everyone was talking to each other about what the blues meant, what the marigold meant, what the oranges meant, when we utilized them, and how. So I think that at a time when we're maneuvering multiple pandemics, you know, we're maneuvering significant change, not only in our lives, but in the industry, fighting for the time to meet people where they are and sit down and talk through process is something that is a luxury. People are shooting really fast and blindly, and people are not spending time with their department heads. They're not rehearsing with their actors. Michelle, there was so much subtext that she excavated from the text because we rehearsed, you know, and we talked. Like, you can't underestimate the power of talking things out before you get on set. So those were all, are you okay? You got some water? Those were things that we were thinking about constantly.
Thank you, guys. I want to open it up for audience questions.
Okay.
Hello. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Rina Yang. The look of the film was so dope. Just you know, the underwater stuff,
Yeah.
the nighttime stuff, just the way it was lit. So yeah, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. And for Anna, I was wondering if you could talk about shooting the water room sequences, having water dumped on you, the sheet over your face. Just the physicality of that was
Water is hard to shoot with, you know, especially, we were a tier 1 film, meaning we were under $10 million shooting in New York City, which is a really expensive city and hard city to shoot in. And then you add the pandemic, and it's like, I don't think a lot of people know that you're adding 30% contingency to your budget for COVID, for PPE, for COVID protocol, for testing every other day. So Rina, I was so happy when I interviewed her and I chose her and she chose me in return, because we had such a fluid process of initially just exchanging imagery and tone and feeling. And it wasn't just references from other films. It was references from paintings and photography and, you know, just imagery from life, even sonicScape, you know, soundscape. So those were the things that really spoke to me. And also, Rina understands how to light and shoot black skin, the depth and breadth of black skin. We're not all the same color. We come in a multitude of complexions. And I will always foundationally look for a DP who understands that. And then on top of that, she had an innovation and a desire to play with the form in a way that I wanted to. So we exchanged imagery, we shot listed, we had a storyboard artist who came on board for particularly our underwater stuff and some of our harder sequences. And also the way Rina maps out shots is she has the floor plan, she has the shot list in prose, in text, and then she has the imagery that we exchange for that particular scene. So for my brain, that's the way that I maximally work, because I have the imagery, I have the words, and I have the floor plan. So now I can't work any other way. And then everyone poured into the frame. Jonathan, Charlize, all my department heads are part of the frame. So it's not just the DP. And then Ian Takahashi was our underwater DP. And he had worked with Beyonce on Lemonade, and I think he's based in the Philippines, but we shipped him in. Our financiers were sick of us shipping people in, because Jonathan was in North Carolina, Rina was in London, Charlize was in LA. We shipped a lot of people in, but I'm never going to just choose people based on proximity. Like, I want to choose people because they're the right people for my team, no matter where they are. And I tend to gravitate to people who are in other places because they see the world through a different lens. People who are immersed in film cities tend to become film robots, you know, making things in one way. And so I love working with people who are in different cities and countries. So it was a really involved process. And Ian, Takahashi, and Rina had a language above. We shot at a YMCA for the underwater stuff. We did not shoot it on a stage or in a tank. And so she was communicating with Ian through walkies that were underwater. So he had a whole underwater setup with lighting and gaffers underwater, and it was amazing considering how low our budget was. Every penny that we got, we poured onto the screen because we had people who were invested in the process.
Up here?
I zone out when I talk about this.
There were so many aspects that I appreciated with the intersectionality of the diaspora and the immigrant experience in the United States. So my man is from Cameroon, and when we met, one of the things that he said to me was just so deep. He said, as an African man, because he lived on the continent for 25 years, lived in Europe, lived in the United States. He says, I needed to come to the United States to know who I was as an African man. That was so incredibly deep for me to hear that. And what fascinated me about this, and I really appreciated, was the diasporic experience with the Trinidadian woman, the Jamaican woman in the park, the sisters, in the, because there's so many stereotypes about that we don't get along.
Yeah.
Right? And I so appreciated you not doing that. I
you.
appreciated that this is a new future. This is the new African American.
Yes.
This was an unplanned thing.
Yeah.
It's like coming on the plane rather than the boat.
Right.
And so I just wanted you to comment on that because it was so deeply, really, because there are parts of us that it does take some pain and some especially if you're in a relationship, to navigate the cultural differences and to get through that. But to know that the ancestors brought us all here to the United States to figure things out, and we're all here now. So I just give my props to that.
Thank
and any
you.
comments that you have.
Thank you. I love when people notice the Black diaspora reflected in this film because that has been my experience growing up. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, to a Sierra Leonean family that threw parties growing up, and I had like Trinidadian uncles and aunts and Jamaican uncles and aunts and people came from all over. And I used to, as a kid, I just thought everyone was Sierra Leonean because that was my context. And then as I grew up, it was just like, oh, everyone's, we're all Black and we all have these accents. Well, everybody had these different accents, but in my childhood brain, it was all the same. And so when I started to maneuver the diaspora wars, I was like, man, it's crazy that this is the focus because the reality is that Blackness in the West, in America, in the West in general, becomes this new blanket that we either embrace or we rebel against in different ways. Nobody cares about your tribe. Nobody cares if you're Mende or Mandingo here. And Black immigrants sometimes have a hard lesson in coming to America because now you're just Black. With an accent, which is cute, but you're just Black until you open your mouth. So it's an education for some Black immigrant parents. And they sometimes raise their Black children in this nation not educating them about racism because they don't want to acknowledge that reality. And so some people maneuver it differently. But anyway, long story short, the nuances of Blackness in this country, in the world, need to be addressed more on the screen because the reality is that we intersect, we collide, but we also have a lot of really beautiful interactions and create new microcosms when we emigrate to new lands. So it was just a reflection of what I grew up with. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have time for just one more question?
Thank you very much. Can we give these sisters a round of applause, please?
Oh, thank you.
My name is Trevor Garifuna, and in watching the film, I myself am an immigrant from the Caribbean, born in Belize, raised in Honduras, Houston, Texas, New York. One thing that I saw in the video, as my mother comes from labor as well, is the violence. The repetitious violence that the sister Aisha and all of the other sisters, including the sister who told her about Lamani, I heard nothing but violence. So to the writer and to Aisha, how did you guys deal with that aspect of it, the violence that is continuous against the sisters?
You know, so I'm the writer and director, and hi. I tried to juxtapose the darkness with light, which is also something that I think a lot of people in their reviews, certain people are reacting to. They're like, is this horror? Like there were scenes of, there's romance, and it's fine because I didn't want to have just relentless violence like you're addressing. But the reality is that being Black in this world, in an anti-Black world, comes with inherent violence. We are at the end of a spectrum that requires that other people thrive because of their anti-Blackness. As long as there's someone who's Black, I'm doing better than them. And that goes for like people of color. We recently heard from this Latina woman who had very anti-Black sentiment. As long as you're not Black, you're doing okay, you know, and it's inherently part of what we're maneuvering in a capitalistic system that hinges on anti-Blackness in order to thrive. So that it's par for the course, but I knew that even within the horror paradigm, having a Black woman protagonist, I did not want her to be relentlessly assaulted. And so I gave her someone who loved her and adored her. I gave her a new family. I gave her a new child. I gave her a best friend who wanted her to be happy. You know, I gifted her these things in a genre that you typically are not supposed to give that much light and levity.
Thank you. Thank you guys for joining
Can
us.
we get one more question?
Oh.
There was one hand over here.
Okay, let's get
Yes,
one more
there
question.
you go.
Oh my gosh. Hi, I just want to say you did an amazing job.
Thank you.
I have some questions about your process just because I'm so fascinated, because it seems like there was so much, I mean, a lot of this was answered, but there was so much fluidity between the two of you working together. And I'm really interested, did you, if this is too personal, let me know, but like, did you guys know each other before? Did you meet in like during production,
In another life.
pre-production?
In another life. We get this
another life.
question often.
I mean,
yeah.
honestly, because like, I've worked in film. I've been under the rampant misogyny. Every time I've worked on a female-directed film, it's just so much better. And
Yes, I agree.
it's just so
I
much
may be
better.
biased, but I agree as well.
So, yeah, kudos to you. Amazing work. I'm
Thank
so
you.
excited to see what you do next.
Thank you.
And
Thank
tackling
you.
this like the way that you talked about climate change too, I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Because using the elements in this like folkloric way was so fresh and refreshing. And I did think about those things. I did think about flooding. I did
Yeah.
think about fire a little bit, you
Yeah.
know. But I would love to see your next film.
Thank you.
Really get into that too, because I mean,
It is
I'm so
actually.
excited.
Climate
I'm
disaster
excited.
is a big
I'm excited to see what you
theme in my next project.
Just wait for it. It's so
Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining us.